The grand hall of the Marchmont estate gleamed with a cold, polished perfection, sunlight streaming through towering arched windows to dance across the marble floor. Golden patterns shimmered under the light, reflecting off the intricate chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls from the high ceiling. The hall was alive with quiet movement, servants gliding silently between tables laden with crystal decanters, silver trays, and delicate pastries. The air carried the faint scent of roses from the gardens outside, mixed with the subtle perfume of sandalwood that always clung to Lord Marchmont's robes. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding her, Amelia felt a profound chill settle in her chest, as though the room itself had conspired to remind her of her unworthiness. She stood near the fireplace, her hands tightly gripping the folds of her pale lavender gown, knuckles whitening as she struggled to contain the tremor in her fingers. Her reflection in the polished marble hearth stared back at her, pale and anxious, with wide, uncertain eyes. She could see her father's shadow moving before her, long and imposing, stretching across the floor as if it were a physical weight pressing down on her very soul. Lord Marchmont's pace was deliberate, each step echoing with authority, the quietest click of his polished shoes sounding like a hammer striking at her confidence. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, never softened as he stopped before her, his presence commanding silence. "Amelia," he said, his voice even and unflinching, "you are a disappointment. I cannot allow the Duke of Wexley to be misled. He is a man of intelligence, refinement, and taste, qualities that are not often found together. He deserves a woman capable of sustaining both his esteem and the family's reputation. Not this." His hand waved dismissively, as if she were nothing more than a shadow in the room. "You lack poise, judgment, and the subtlety required of a Marchmont daughter. You are unworthy." Amelia's chest tightened, each word slicing deeper than any blade could. For years, she had devoted herself to studying etiquette, mastering the art of conversation, practicing her posture until it was flawless, and learning to read the complex games of society. Every lesson, every effort, seemed to vanish in the moment her father spoke. She swallowed hard, struggling to keep her voice from quivering. I understand, father," she murmured, her tone quiet but careful, betraying neither anger nor despair. "I only wish to serve our family in any way I can." Her father's gaze remained icy, a judgment that felt eternal. With a curt nod, he turned away, already rehearsing the praises he would lavish upon her sister Evelyn when she arrived later that morning to meet the Duke. Amelia felt a familiar knot of dread twist in her stomach. Evelyn, the perfect daughter in their father's eyes, would glide into the hall like sunlight, radiant and unchallenged, while Amelia would be forgotten, invisible in the shadows of her sister's brilliance. When Evelyn arrived, she did not disappoint. Her long golden hair shone with a natural luster, her gown was elegant without effort, and she carried herself with a confident ease that seemed to mesmerize everyone in the room. The servants whispered their admiration, the ladies nodded with polite smiles, and the men offered respectful bows. Amelia watched from the corner, the edges of her vision blurred with unshed tears. She forced a small, polite smile, but it felt brittle and hollow, a fragile mask she could barely maintain. The Duke of Wexley arrived shortly after, a tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet authority that drew attention even before he spoke. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room with an unspoken expectation, taking in the smiling courtiers and the polished grandeur of the hall. He approached Evelyn first, offering words of admiration for her charm, intelligence, and accomplishments. Amelia lingered, unsure of whether she was expected to speak, remain silent, or simply fade into the background. Her pulse quickened as she observed the easy rapport forming between her sister and the Duke, laughter filling the air, elegant and effortless. Then, unexpectedly, his gaze fell upon her. Amelia froze, unsure if she should duck away, blend into the shadows, or simply hold her ground. His eyes did not glimmer with mockery or pity, they were calm, curious, and strangely discerning. For a moment, it felt as though he were looking straight into her soul, past her pale dress and nervous posture, past the walls of rejection she had built around herself, to something deeper. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice carrying through the quiet hum of the room, "your father calls you unworthy. Do you truly believe you are?" The words were simple, but they resonated in her chest like the toll of a distant bell. Amelia's lips parted, unsure what to say. Her heart pounded, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to speak not as the girl her father had condemned, but as someone with her own voice. I have often felt overshadowed," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet steady. "But I try to do what is right, even when unnoticed. I try to be kind, honest, and patient. The Duke inclined his head slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. That is a rare thing in our world, he said, his tone gentle but deliberate. Worth is not always measured by accomplishments or beauty. Sometimes, it is proven by how one holds oneself when ignored, underestimated, or dismissed. Courage, strength, patience, these are not easily taught, yet they are invaluable. Amelia's chest swelled, a mixture of surprise and hope washing through her. Could it be possible that someone actually saw her, not as her father saw her, not as society expected her to be, but as she truly was? For years, she had yearned for recognition, for someone to notice the quiet persistence, the late nights spent practicing letters, the careful attention to small deeds of kindness that went unseen. And now, the Duke's gaze held that recognition, unspoken but undeniable. Her sister's laughter, once the sharpest edge of her envy and despair, now seemed distant. The hall, with its golden light and murmuring courtiers, felt smaller, more intimate, as though the world had condensed to the space between her and the Duke. Amelia straightened her shoulders, finding a courage she had never known she possessed. Perhaps worth was not defined by her father, nor by the expectations of the world, but by the one who could truly see her heart. The Duke's eyes softened, and he extended a subtle nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that he understood her. Sometimes, he said quietly, one must be chosen not because of perfection, but because of truth. And truth is often found in the most unexpected places. Amelia felt a shiver of anticipation run down her spine. Could it be that her life was about to change, not through inherited titles or society's approval, but through someone daring to see what truly mattered? For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond her father's harsh judgment. Beyond rejection, beyond expectation, there might exist a place where she could be valued for who she truly was. The hall seemed to fade around her, the polished floors, glittering chandeliers, and murmuring nobles all receding into the background. Only his gaze remained, steady, patient, and unwavering. And in that gaze, Amelia found something she had never thought possible: hope. The Marchmont Estates ballroom was alive with light and music that evening, a dazzling display of wealth and refinement. Candles flickered in ornate sconces, their golden glow reflected in polished floors and crystal chandeliers. Velvet gowns swept across the marble, their colors bright and sumptuous, and the sound of laughter and polite conversation filled every corner. The air was scented with roses and amber, mingling with the faint tang of champagne and the faint smoke of fireplace logs. Every detail seemed designed to impress, every gesture rehearsed to perfection, but beneath the glamour, a storm of expectation lingered, one that weighed heavily on Amelia's chest. She stood near the balcony, her hands folded delicately in front of her, trying to remain unnoticed. Her pale lavender gown flowed around her, soft and understated, in stark contrast to the vibrant dresses and bold colors of the other young women gathered in the room. Amelia had learned long ago to blend into the background, to fade until she was practically invisible, and for many years it had been her only defense. Yet tonight, a strange sense of anticipation fluttered within her, a tiny ember of hope that refused to be extinguished. Lord Marchmont, tall and imposing, stood near the center of the room, his eyes fixed proudly on Evelyn. Every movement she made, every graceful smile or clever remark, seemed to inflate his sense of satisfaction. To him, the outcome of the evening was certain. The Duke of Wexley would choose Evelyn, as everyone expected, and Amelia would quietly fade back into the shadows. He glanced briefly at his other daughter, his gaze sharp and critical, as though trying to find some flaw that might remind him why he had once called her unworthy. But Amelia remained composed, her face serene, even as her heart raced beneath the calm surface. The Duke moved through the room with ease, his tall figure commanding attention without effort. His piercing blue eyes scanned the crowd, offering polite smiles, nods, and words of admiration to the assembled nobility. He approached Evelyn first, engaging her in conversation, laughing lightly at her clever jokes, and complimenting her grace and intellect. The room seemed to orbit around her, and for a moment, Amelia felt that familiar pang of inadequacy, the familiar sting of being overlooked, ignored, and underestimated. Yet even amidst the laughter and applause surrounding Evelyn, the Duke's gaze drifted. It moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, toward the far corner where Amelia stood. She felt it touch her like a brush of cold air, making her breath catch in her throat. Unlike the others, he did not look at her with polite admiration, nor with dismissive curiosity. His eyes were steady, assessing, as if he were peering beyond her appearance to the essence of who she truly was. Amelia's pulse quickened. For years, she had lived in the shadow of her sister, accustomed to rejection and invisibility, but now she felt as though the world had condensed into the space between her and the Duke. The room, the music, the murmuring nobles, all faded into the background. Only his gaze remained, firm and unwavering. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm yet carrying an authority that silenced the surrounding chatter. "Tonight, I have had the pleasure of meeting many remarkable young ladies," he began. "Each possesses charm, intelligence, and grace. Yet, in all my encounters, I have found that true worth is not always adorned in obvious beauty or loud accomplishments. Sometimes, it lies in quiet strength, integrity, and heart." Heads turned, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Whispers rose as guests speculated which young woman he might be referring to. Amelia felt a flutter of fear mixed with hope, unsure if she dared believe that he meant her. She kept her hands folded, fingers entwined tightly, as her pulse raced with every word. "Amelia Marchmont," he continued, and the room fell completely silent. "I choose you." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Evelyn's hand flew to her chest, her eyes widening in disbelief. Lord Marchmont's face turned an ashen shade of anger and shock. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, a ripple of astonishment passing from one guest to another. Amelia's knees threatened to buckle beneath her, but she steadied herself, gripping the folds of her gown as though it were a lifeline. You choose her over Evelyn?" Lord Marchmont demanded, his voice trembling with rage and incredulity. "This is impossible. She is unworthy." The Duke inclined his head with calm dignity, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Indeed," he said quietly. "Amelia's courage, thoughtfulness, and resilience speak louder to me than any accomplishments or outward beauty. She has faced the shadow of doubt and rejection with grace. She possesses qualities that cannot be inherited or taught, qualities that are rare and invaluable. I do not seek perfection. I seek truth." Amelia felt her chest swell with a mixture of pride, relief, and disbelief. Her father's words, which had once wounded her so deeply, now felt almost distant, powerless against the validation of someone who truly saw her. She met the Duke's gaze and allowed herself a small, trembling smile, a smile that held years of suppressed hope and unspoken courage. The guests murmured among themselves, some offering polite applause, others whispering their astonishment and curiosity. Evelyn's smile, once bright and confident, faltered. She clapped softly, her eyes shadowed with shock and a trace of envy that she could not fully hide. Lord Marchmont, his pride bruised beyond measure, remained frozen, unable to speak, his earlier certainty shattered. The Duke extended his hand toward Amelia. She hesitated for a heartbeat, overwhelmed by emotion, then placed her hand in his. The warmth of his grasp was grounding, anchoring her in a new reality she had scarcely dared imagine. As the music swelled once more, a slow, sweeping waltz filling the ballroom, Amelia felt herself lifted above the whispers, the doubts, and the shadows of the past. For the first time, she realized that being chosen, truly chosen, was not about pleasing her father or conforming to society's expectations. It was about being recognized for her inner strength, her integrity, and her heart. The Duke led her to the center of the ballroom, and as they moved together, Amelia could see the faces of the guests turning toward them. Some were stunned, some impressed, and others quietly intrigued. But Amelia no longer cared for the judgments of the world. She had been overlooked for so long, yet now, against all odds, she was seen, and it felt more precious than any treasure. Lord Marchmont watched, silent and furious, as the realization sank in that his plans, his careful calculations, and his expectations had been overturned. His chosen daughter, Evelyn, stood beside him, struggling to hide her dismay, while Amelia glided gracefully beside the Duke, her confidence growing with each step. Every whispered word, every glance, affirmed what she had always known in the quiet corners of her heart: worth is not granted by others, it is recognized by those who truly see it. As the waltz carried them around the room, Amelia felt a sense of liberation she had never known. The weight of years of rejection and the sting of her father's harsh judgment melted away. She was no longer just the overlooked daughter, the one deemed unworthy. She was Amelia Marchmont, chosen against all odds, and in that moment, she understood that true recognition was more powerful than wealth, beauty, or status. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine the future, not one dictated by expectations or shadows, but one shaped by courage, heart, and the rare chance to be seen for who she truly was. And as the Duke's hand held hers firmly and gently, she realized that life's greatest triumphs are not measured by what the world demands, but by who dares to recognize the quiet, unspoken worth within.